Okay. So what we've got today is solving linear equations involving indices. So that's power and roots as well, only. So nothing else combined with it. Okay, so we're going to go into some examples straight away, and we're going to go through the thought process of how to solve questions that involve indices, so powers and roots. Okay, also you might want to get your calculator ready because we might need it for a few questions. Okay, now we have a question: x squared, or x to the power of 2, whichever you prefer, is equal to 4. Solve or find x. So the first thing we know is we want to find x. That means to get x on its own on one side. Now we ask ourselves what's attached to x that we need to get away. It's the power of 2. So to get that away from x, we have to use the opposite. Now, the opposite of powering up is powering down, which is basically another way of saying roots. Okay, so to get rid of a squared, I use a square root. So if I square root x squared on the left, I have to do the same on the right, okay? And that's how we go through the process. Now, here is the solution thought process that I'm going to be using to solve the question now. So I have x squared is equal to 4. I want to find x, so I want to get x on its own. I identify there's a power of 2, or square, attached to x, and I need to get rid of it. So I use a square root. Now, because I have done that to one side of the equals 2 sign, I have to do it to the other side. So I square root both sides. Because I did it to the left, I've got to do it to the right. Now, square root of x squared serves its purpose, gets rid of the squared, so I just have x, and the square root of 4, that's just 2. Okay? Now, if you're wondering, what method do I need to use if I'm doing square root of 4 by hand, that's something you would have been able to learn from one of the previous videos. Because remember, all these videos are not just chopped up, they follow each other perfectly to make sure that everything you learn helps you for the next video and leaves no gaps in your knowledge to be able to understand what is in the videos to come. Okay, so our final answer is x is equal to 2. Now, we have another question. N squared is equal to 49. Solve or find n. Once again, from the question, we identify that it's n we want to find, so that's what we want to get on its own on one side. We identify anything that is attached to n, so that's only a squared, so we use the opposite sign, which is a square root in this case, to get rid of the square. And whatever we do to the left, or whatever we do to one side of the equals to sign, we have to do to the other side. So, to get rid of the squared on the left, I square root n squared, and because I've done that to the left, I've got to do it to the right as well. Now on the left, the square root was introduced to get rid of the square, so square root of n squared is just n, and the square root of 49, and that's just 7. So our final answer, n is equal to 7. Now, we have a question. P cubed is equal to 64. Solve or find p. Now I want to find p, meaning I want to get p all on its own. There's a cubed, or a power of 3, attached to p. I want to get it away from p, so I use the opposite sign, which is what we call a cube root. Okay? And so, to get cube, or the power of 3, away from p, I use a cube root, so that means I put a 3 in here to show that it's a cube root, and because I've done that to the left of the equals to sign, I have to do the same to the right. So I cube root 64 on the right as well. Okay, Now, because cube root gets rid of a cube, on the left, p cubed, cube rooted, that's just p, and on the right, the cube root of 64, that's just 4. So, for my final answer, p is equal to 4. Now, we have a question, b squared is equal to 10. Solve or find b to one decimal place. Now, some of the stuff we're going to be doing with this question, if you have watched all the videos leading up to this one, you should be able to understand everything. The only thing we're doing new, I will be explaining. Okay? So get your calculator and let's get into it. So, we want to find b. So, we want to get b all on its own. So we have to get rid of the squared attached to b. So we have to use the opposite sign to get rid of it. So if it's a squared, the opposite sign is a square root. So I square root b squared. Now, if I square root b squared on one side of the equals 2 sign, I have to do the same to the other side. So I have to square root 10. Now on the left, square root of b squared, it just gets rid of the squared, so I just have b. Now on the right, square root of 10, that's a whole different number. So if you put in your calculator, it's a bunch of decimals. Okay, now the question wants b to one decimal place. This is not b to one decimal place. So for our final answer, we say b is equal to 3 point, our first decimal place is 1, but we check the number after it before we close out. If it's greater than 4, we add 1 to the previous number. If it's less than 5, we add 0. In this case, 6 is greater than 4, so we add 1 to 1, so that makes 2. So b, for our final answer to one decimal place, is 3.2. Okay? If the rounding doesn't make sense, it's probably because you've missed the rounding video, and that's the one you need to go back to make sure you understand how to round. Okay? Now, we have a question. R cubed is equal to 25. Solve or find R to 3 significant figures. Okay? First thing we identify, so we want to find R. That means we want to get R on its own. Next thing we do, we identify all the things connected to R. In this case, there's only a power of 3, or we can call it a cube. Okay? So to get rid of it, we use the opposite sign, which is a cube root. So we cube root R cubed, or we can call it R to the power of 3. Now, because we've done that to the left of the equals to sign, we have to do the same to the right. So we cube root 25. Now, cube root of R cubed, that's just R. Cube root of 25, you have to go to your calculator for that. Okay, so to find the cube root sign, on most scientific calculators, you need to press shift and press the square root sign. Okay, so now we're not done because this is not 3 significant figures. So R is equal to, we count our 3 significant figures, 2.9. The third one is 2, but before we take it, we check the number just after it. If it's greater than 4, we add 1 to the previous number. If it's less than 5, we add 0 to the previous number. So because 4 is less than 5, we add 0 to the previous number. So 0 plus 2, that's just 2. So R is 2.92. Okay, at this juncture, I should first say that in the solution thought process, the first one for roots, I spelled identify wrong. I wrote it with a N in there, which is wrong. I apologize. And I have corrected it for this one. Now, to go into this question, which is different. This is square root y is equal to 5. Solve or find y. Once again, to solve or find y means to get y on its own on one side. So we identify what's connected to y. In this case, that is a square root. So we use the opposite sign to get rid of a square root from y, which in this case would be a square or a power of 2. They mean the same thing. And remember, whatever we do to one side of the equals to sign, we do to the other side. So if I was to put that into math, I have square root of y equals 5. So want to get rid of the square root, square root of y, put that in a bracket and do that. On the right, because I've done it to the left, I've got to do it to the right as well. And so square root of y to the power of 2, that's just y. And 5 squared, that's 5 times 5, which is just 25. So final answer, y is equal to 25. Now, we have another question. Square root of w is equal to 2 over 3. Solve or find w. Once again, we want to get w on its own in this case. It has a square root attached to it, so that's what we want to get rid of. We use the opposite sign to do that, which is a square. We can either use a bracket or not. In this case, I could just put it here. If I don't want to use a bracket, it's up to you. And since I've done that to the left, I can do that to the right as well. So that's 2 over 3. I've got to use a bracket in this case, because the power of 2 doesn't just go on 2 or just on 3, it goes on both of them. Okay, so on the left, square root of w to the power of 2, that's just w. Now you can look at this in one of two ways. So 2 over 3 to the power of 2, you can write it as 2 to the power of 2 over 3 to the power of 2. So the power of 2 affects both of them. Or you could simply just say, another way to write this is 2 over 3 times 2 over 3. Either way, you end up with the same answer, which is w is equal to 2 squared. Or you can say 2 times 2 is 4, 3 squared or 3 times 3 is 9. So w is equal to 4 over 9. Now, we have another question. Square root of r is equal to 2.2. Solve or find r. Basically, get r on its own. So, we identify the square root connected to r as what we need to get rid of. So, the opposite sign we have to use is the power of 2, or a square. So we apply that to square root of r, and because we've done that to the left of the equals to sign, we have to do that to the right of the equals to sign. So that's 2.2 to the power of 2. Now on the left, square root of r squared, that's just r. Now on the right, you can do this by hand or with a calculator. 2.2 squared is 4.84. Now I would advise you know how to use both a calculator and without a calculator. Now we have a question. Cube root of t is equal to 3. Solve or find t, which simply means get t on its own. So in this case, the only thing attached to t is a cube root. So I use the opposite sign, which is a cube, to get rid of the cube root attached to t. And because I've done that to one side of the equals to sign, I have to do that to the other side. So 3 to the power of 3. Now, cube root of t to the power of 3, that's just t. And 3 to the power of 3, That's just 3 times 3 times 3. Basically 27. So our final answer, t, is equal to 27. Now, we have a new question. Cube root of m is equal to 1.3. Solve or find m. So, what that means is we want to get m on its own. Get rid of the cube root attached to it. So what we do is we use the opposite sign to do that. In this case, that would be a cube. Okay? Now because we've attached a cube on the left, we've got to do the same thing to the right. So 1.3 to the power of 3. Now, cube root and the power of 3 get rid of each other. So we just have m on the left, and on the right, 1.3 to the power of 3. You can do that in your calculator, and that will get you 2.197. Okay? And that's our final answer for m. Now, these questions that we're going to be doing next are bonus questions, and I believe you're going to need them down the line. So I want to show you how to do them now in isolation before you see them injected into a more complex question. Okay? So we have k squared is equal to 25 over 16. Solve or find k. Same thing, we want to get k on its own. So we identify what's attached to it. So the only thing attached to it is a square. So we use the opposite sign, which is a square root, to get rid of the square. Now, because we've attached the square root to the left, we attach a square root to the right. Okay? Now, square root of k squared, the square root and the square, they deal with each other, and we just have k on the left. Now, on the right, that square root, we can break it up to affect each number at the top and at the bottom individually. So that's square root of 25 over square root of 16, which we can deal with individually. So square root of 25, we find that out as 5, and square root of 16, we find that out as 4. Okay, so with a fraction, k is equal to 5 over 4. Now you can also write that as a decimal. If you wanted to figure that out, that would be as a decimal, k would be equal to 1.25. Now, apart from this solution that I have shown here, writing 5 over 4 as a decimal is something that has been covered in the previous videos, which you should have watched and understood before you get to this point, so you would not have any holes in your knowledge or in understanding the things I'm saying in this session that I'm not fully explaining because I have explained them in a previous video. Okay? Now, we have another question. K cubed is equal to 27 over 64. Solve or find k, which means get k on its own. Now we identify everything attached to k. In this case, there's a power of 3. So, to get rid of that power of 3, we use the opposite sign, which is a cube root. So we attach it to the left. So cube root, k cubed, and because we've attached it to the left, we do the same to the right. Now, the cube from k and the cube root take care of each other, and so we just have k on the left, okay? And on the right, we split the cube root to affect the top and the bottom individually. So cube root of 27 over cube root of 64. Now, cube root of 27, that's noted as 3. You should be able to do that. That has been shown how to be done by hand, or you could use your calculator to figure that out. And cube root of 64, that has been shown how to be done by hand, or you can do that with a calculator. That will give you an answer of 4. That's 3/4 as a fraction, and as a decimal, you can do that by hand or with a calculator. You will end up with 0.75. Okay, so we can express k as our final answer as a fraction for 3/4, or as a decimal as 0.75. Okay, so watch this video as many times as you want, practice questions to it, and it will become second nature to you. Okay, thank you very much. You've been listening to the Math Don, and until next time.